You are listening to Leading the Factory Forward with your host, Lynn Friest. We share interviews with manufacturing experts and strategies for embracing the digital future, recruiting a new workforce, finding new business. Lynn is an advanced manufacturing strategist and leadership consultant who is on a mission to show manufacturing leaders how to improve their current operations while preparing for a digital future. And here's your host, Lynn Friest.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Leading the Factory Forward. This is episode number 84, and it's Coaching and Listening with Michelle Luebke. At Leading the Factory Forward, our goal is to help you create a compelling future for yourself, your teams, and your organization. I always encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode and use that as a tool to capture notes as you explore the concepts in this episode. Or to help you get started on your journey and to stay up to date on new episodes, please download the free worksheet, 3 steps you need for a more productive workday. In this episode, I'm excited to be talking with Michelle Luebke. I've known Michelle for many years, and she has an amazing breadth and depth of skills and knowledge. Michelle is the founder of Highlight HR Consulting. She has over 20 years of experience in all aspects of HR, including HR process design and implementation, coaching at all levels of management, and global HR management and compliance experience. Prior to the consulting business, Michelle worked in a variety of HR roles at John Deere, most recently as the HR operations lead for the U.S. Agricultural and Turf Division. So today's episode, Michelle will be covering a few considerations for leaders and all people in organizations about being coached and coaching others, listening skills, which are so important to coaching as well as all leadership success, and challenging conversations, which could be a conflict or an interview or a performance review or other types of conversations. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the podcast. Today, we're speaking with Michelle Luebke, and it's going to be themes around coaching and other aspects listening. She'll share her experiences and knowledge on that. But to start off, I'd like to ask Michelle to introduce herself and share some ideas of what she's up to and what she's trying to work on now.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to reconnect with you. Yep. So I have worked in the corporate world for 29 years up until late last year, 2020. And now I've just started my own HR consulting firm. So I'm the founder and the principal HR consultant for that organization. And so far, so good. It's been really fun. I live in the Quad Cities, which is on the border of Iowa and Illinois, and I'm married to Jim. We have 3 sons and 1 daughter-in-law.
Great. Starting right off, I know you've had long involvement in coaching and worked in the HR side of things. So why would you say coaching is valuable to leaders?
Gosh, I think that coaching is such a rich topic. So one thing maybe to start with, just to clarify for your listeners, is I find that a lot of times coaching is, in the professional sense, is misunderstood by people who haven't had the benefit of being coached or who have not coached others. And so just to provide some quick context there, in the sports context, we all are pretty familiar with what a coach does. We've seen them do it. Sometimes we've coached ourselves in Little League or soccer or anything like that. And so we know from that coach that they provide expertise and they provide direction in that particular sport. So they come from a place of knowing and they share that knowledge with their coachees. But the distinction then on the professional side of coaching is when we talk about coaching executives or professionals is actually the opposite. It comes from a place of not knowing or objectivity. And that doesn't make immediate sense to people because they think, well, why would I enlist a coach who doesn't know what I'm doing or doesn't know my discipline or who hasn't had success in my area? But what I'd offer there is that's really where kind of the magic happens. So it's the not knowing and the objectivity that can really provoke some great thinking on the part of the coaching client and really help them discover for themselves or even articulate for themselves what's been maybe clanking around in their head for a while and get it out on the table, sharing it with somebody who's a great listener, who's trusted, who's confidential, and who can really help them kind of pull those ideas out of their head and put them out into the world so that they can actually act on them and become even more successful. So maybe back to your question, I would say asking any leader who's thinking about coaching is how important is it for someone in your role to have a structured time to think and plan and reflect? How important is that? Probably pretty important. And then how much impact do you think it would be if you actually had the time to articulate your thinking and your planning and your reflection aloud to that confidential sounding board, which we have in a coach? And that's where the power of coaching comes in. And so as a result of what I've just described, I've been coached, I've coached others, and I really have seen what I call the magic of coaching and great results across a whole variety of disciplines, operations, marketing, human resources. It works for Americans. It works for non-Americans. It works across the world. And another word you mentioned earlier is really just that really intentional, focused listening that comes behind the coaching.
Yeah, Michelle, I know some of my experience has been in coaching that sometimes what people told me were the best coaching sessions, I said very little, quite frankly. But again, that power of, especially for leaders that are often have sort of a lonely role in some cases, but for them to have the opportunity to just speak out loud about what they've been thinking. As you said earlier, there's a magic in that. They can really clarify things for themselves. They can articulate it. And then, later on, they can say it to others.
Yes.
The magic is really interesting.
Yes. And like you, Lynn, we probably had similar experiences in talking to those leaders where so many times they have said to us, I just don't have anyone else to talk to about this. Or the other thing I noticed when you were saying some of the best coaching was when you said very little. Another one that I kind of get excited about is when they say, gosh, you gave me some really great advice this time. And in fact, I gave them no advice at all. I really just reflected back to them on their own thinking and they came up with their own solutions. They just needed someone to listen to them long enough to really flesh those out.
I agree entirely. And again, this opportunity to reflect and just think and talk about whatever it is you're working on is sometimes rare in leaders' positions because they're very much action-oriented, very much in the doing of things all the time.
Yes, we're very execution focused across any really industry. I can't come up with an industry that's not action oriented. And so you're right. The hustle and bustle of life can really take people away. And so I think that if leaders can really take the time and give themselves the gift of being coached, it's amazing what they can produce.
And I think there's an element of doing this over a period of time also. Again, maybe you can reflect that sometimes things kind of develop over a period of weeks or months as a person is coached.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Sometimes we think about the metaphor of peeling the onion, or there's other metaphors like that, maybe running a marathon versus a sprint. So we think about, the mind's pretty powerful. And as we peel that onion, we think about more ideas, or we go back and we try something and it kind of works and it kind of doesn't work. And then we reflect and we debrief with a coach or a trusted colleague and then try something a little bit different. And so like you were saying, sometimes it can be really iterative in a very positive way.
Yeah. And I think I've had coachees who they were making a presentation or they were having a conversation with somebody and they'd go do that. Then we'd talk about that the following week or whatever. And they'd figure out, well, this went well and I'll keep doing that. And this didn't go so well. So maybe I should change that up. And I think a lot of times when I think of the people that I've been coaching, they're actually working on ideas around behavior. And for me, we don't change behavior in a single session. It changes over time. So I think, has that been a similar thing that you've seen?
Yeah, it's so true. Is we're all masterpieces in progress. We all have strengths and we all have gaps. And I noticed that people really have often so much more energy around strengthening strengths than filling gaps. And so back to those behaviors, it really does take a lot of practice. So that's where we go back to, even the sports world. All of us have tried something in our lives, sports or dance or whatever, to become even better experts, so to speak, or on the path to expertise, perhaps. And so it does take a variety of trials and learning from those trials, maybe even a few minor failures to get to a better place, whatever that behavior is. And then I like what you mentioned about the feedback, debriefing, and then the feedback on it. So back to that coach is having someone who can hold up a mirror and say, wow, you handled A, B, and C really well, but sounds like you fumbled a little bit on D. Let's talk about that one. And what do you notice about what you did there? What did you do well? What do you want to do differently next time you come across that situation?
Yeah. Another way I personally think of these things is we have habits in life, and that actually we do a lot of things through habit. But then it's important that we be more intentional about what are our habits of thinking and what are our habits of action. And I think a coach can help you on both those things. If my thinking habit is one of limitations and stuff like that, a coach can help you find a new perspective maybe. But it takes time because, again, that's your habit of thinking. It takes a while to change that. So
Yes, it does. And that reminds me of benefits that I've gotten from coaches and hopefully I provide to coaching clients, which is this whole thing out of being responsible for what you're throwing out there, for what you say. So you and I say junk stuff all the time. Lots of people do, but a coach is there to kind of with that safety net going, well, really? Do you really mean that? Did you really say that? Do you really think that way? And kind of peeling it back a little bit and holding people accountable for what they have to say.
No, I agree that holding up the mirror. And sometimes I've had coachees say, I want you to challenge me as much as you can. I want you to make me uncomfortable. So it's not that we're just as coaches being there to be cheerleaders and stuff, although we can fill that role. We're also there to give them that honest feedback because, again, many people in leadership roles, they won't often really get honest feedback.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I had a recent coachee who told me after one session, what did he say? That our session was painfully helpful. I decided to take it as a compliment.
Yep. Yeah, I think that can be true. And I've had that experience too when coaches have held my mirror up and I wasn't flattered by what I saw in my mirror.
Darn it.
So any other thoughts on coaching and the benefits it can provide? How often should they have coaching sessions? Those kinds of things. What's been your experience?
I know there's lots of different schools of thought on the best rhythm for coaching sessions. For me personally, I think what I've settled into is I feel like kind of the perfect rhythm, if it's possible, is every other week. Why? Because you can really generate a lot of great ideas and discussion in a session and some potential actions. And so there's a lot of momentum that I often see in the coaching client. And so I think that a lot of these people have really big roles and maybe a week's too fast to see them execute all the actions they want to get into. 2 weeks is a little bit more comfortable. Whereas a month sometimes you kind of feel that loss of momentum. And sometimes you have to kind of refresh too much of the information, take up too much of the call or the conversation on catching up and getting back up to speed. So, lots of rhythms can work for lots of coaches and their clients. I just think for me, the sweet spot I've noticed is every other week.
Okay, great. Well, I thought we'd move on from the coaching as a concept into the specific skills, which is about listening. What can people improve on listening? I mean, we all say we all do it. We may do it well. We often do it poorly. But what are some of your thoughts there?
Well, I thought I was a really good listener until I took a full day listening class from Paul Excel about 20 years ago. And fortunately and unfortunately, that was a wake up call. And so since that class, I've been, again, a work in progress, trying to work really hard on being a great listener because so many of us really are just waiting to respond. Don't interrupt. We're just patiently waiting until we can get a word in. Well, that's not really listening at all. And so I think that it's really a fine art, maybe a little bit of science to be especially a good listener, to listen to not only what's said and how it's said, but just as important, what's not said. And I think those are the pieces that when you're really focused on listening to someone, that's where you need to be.
Yeah, I took the same class and I often remember how uncomfortable it was because in the class you had some exercises and a person was supposed to speak for 2 or 3 minutes uninterrupted. And that was actually very hard because we're not used to literally speaking for that long in a conversation with someone.
Yes, it's so true. It starts with silence and giving the person your full attention, which, I think sometimes we just got to call a timeout and say, I'm in the middle of something right now. Can I call you back at 11 o'clock? Or can we talk in 10 minutes? Or can we talk later tonight? Or whatever it is, just being really honest about your availability. And then when you are available and you are committed to that conversation, just being all in the conversation. That is a huge gift for anybody who's received it, which I've been fortunate to have received that gift from many people on many occasions. And then I try to be that same gift for other people, whether it's in a coaching situation or with my family or friends or any kind of professional discussion.
And I found it's kind of interesting in those extended spells of listening or speaking. What I've often found for people and myself is that you kind of go over the surface in the first minute or 45 seconds, but then as you hit a second or third minute, all of a sudden, the conversation goes a lot deeper. You're now sharing more and richer information about whatever it is that you're trying to share about. It's interesting.
Yes, for sure. On that note, for a long time, I held this belief that something that humans had in common was the need to be understood. I always thought, gosh, that's what we all share. The human condition, one of the things we really need is to be understood. And although that's a really great feeling, I've learned through the listening class and the listening practice and coaching practice that it's actually simpler than that, which is what we all really have in common is not necessarily the need to be understood, but to be heard. And we can all come up with examples of where we have come across someone who's rarely been heard. And especially in the HR discipline, you can imagine in human resources that I have dealt with the good, the bad, and the ugly on the human side. And so many times I came across people who just had never been heard. And if you give them the gift of actually hearing them, you can remove a huge roadblock to their becoming a much better human, becoming their better self, and often evolving into being truly effective and successful just from even a single conversation or a series of conversations where they truly got heard.
No, I agree 100%. And again, I was in labor relations, and I always remember, and I've probably shared this in other episodes, where I would meet with the people on the off shift, second or third shifts. And I just let them present whatever they wanted to present. And then at the end, I say, do you have a request? And they say, no, I'm good. No one ever listened to me before, So sometimes it's as simple as, like you say, that uninterrupted listening and letting them be heard. And in fact, another thing that occurs to me is in studying some stuff that Google shared on highly effective teams, one of the key elements of a highly effective team was that the team members all had equal opportunity to speak.
Oh my gosh, that's cool.
Not necessarily to be, their idea adopted or any, but everybody had relatively equal opportunity to contribute. So then I think of leaders saying, okay, that's an important part of you leading your teams then is, have you noticed when people are speaking and not speaking? And have you invited everybody to try to speak so that everyone gets a chance to listen to them?
Yes. And then when they actually do speak, maybe even those people who have sat back a bit or tend to be a little bit quieter or not sure that they've earned the right to speak yet, when they do speak, being really focused on what they have to say, truly listening to what they have to say, which would certainly encourage them to share more of their ideas. And, it's interesting. Those quiet ones really have some great insights that so many of us miss out on because we don't take the time to really focus on what they have to say.
No, I agree. Yeah. And I've also often been surprised as I, again, listen in that second, third, fourth minute of their speaking. I find that I had completely misunderstood what they were getting at, that they really helped me by that extra time of listening. I really understood them better. And I would have gone off track if I'd tried to respond too early.
Mm-hmm. One example that jumps to mind for me that was just so profound in the listening space and the value of being heard is I had a short expat assignment in Sron, France at the engine factory for John Deere. And it's been many years now since I was in this conversation, but it has stuck with me since then, which was basically, I was at lunch with a colleague. We were just one-on-one and we were certainly friendly, but I wouldn't describe us as friends. And I was all day, every day in French, and I would describe myself as proficient in French, but not fluent. And so we were having a casual conversation that evolved into her sharing a story about her relationship with her father, which was complicated. And in the beginning of the conversation, and I'm just listening, I'm not asking any questions, I'm just truly listening to her. She starts slowly, she's describing the situation, she's describing her father, etc. And then the longer she goes and the more she peels that onion and the more she realizes I'm truly listening to her, she talks faster and she's more animated and she's a bit more emotional. And she's really getting into those other layers that you were talking about. And I, for a moment, started to panic because I'm like, oh my gosh, she's speaking too fast. I'm not getting everything. I'm not understanding everything she's saying. And then I was reminded it didn't matter because this was probably the first time she was actually heard, at least in this conversation about her father. And so when she finished sharing everything she had to share, again, all I was doing was listening. She probably talked for a good 10 or 15 minutes. She let out this huge sigh at the end of her monologue, huge sigh. And her face changed, her demeanor changed. She looked so at peace. And I think it was simple. It was just somebody had heard her.
Oh, absolutely. That reminds me, I was at a business conference and there was a woman there. She was actually British, but she worked for Royal Dutch Shell in Amsterdam. And we were having a conversation about knowledge management, actually, and sharing information. And she pointed out to me that, Lynn, folks in North America think you understand one another because you share the same language. He says, we know that because we're speaking different languages in Europe, that we inherently are probably not understanding, and we're a lot more intentional about being clear in speaking and better in listening. And so that always stuck with me that, yeah, I'm sure here in the U.S., we gloss over things, assuming everybody understands or we have common understandings around words. And in fact, that's almost certainly not the case in many cases.
I love that insight. That's so true. It's a great thing for us to think about.
Yeah. And now I've been working with some colleagues in, both Italy and India, and you do have to pay more attention. We're all speaking English, which I'm fortunate, but still, we are much more intentional about how we speak and how we listen because we know there's going to be some misunderstandings or possible misunderstandings.
Yeah. Good for you all to acknowledge that and to think about it and to still persevere and continue to create the actions or execute in the way that you do. And it's not easy to do, is it?
Right. No. Well, the third thing we wanted to check in with you on is, when we mentioned this earlier, some challenging conversations. So you've had them, I've had them, but what are some of the frameworks or mindsets, perspectives that you would use as you prepare for a challenging conversation?
Well, I think one thing to acknowledge is that challenging conversations are a part of life. And I don't know, but it seems like they always kind of catch us all by surprise. Like, oh my goodness, we had this misunderstanding, or there's a huge confusion here, or whatever. It catches us by surprise. And I find that a few people are good at them. They handle them well in many situations, but most people really don't. And I don't know if it's the element of surprise or if they do know one's coming, they haven't prepared. I'm not really sure. I haven't figured all of that out yet, but we tend to then dread them. We push them off. We avoid them altogether. But because challenging conversations are a part of life, I would propose that it's really in all of our best interests to work to become better at them. And I think the most helpful thing to think about as I'm considering a conversation, whether it's with an employee or a leader or even a family member, is, okay, I've got this conversation that I need to have. It's going to be challenging. What will this make possible? What will this make possible on the other side of the conversation? And really trying to focus on whatever that solution or that better outcome could be once we get through the conversation, or in some cases, the series of conversations. So in my new business, I do have a workshop on this. So I kind of created a framework for challenging conversations. And it really has kind of three phases. One is plan and prepare if you can, if you know it's coming. And then in the conversation is a reminder to be here now. So back to, we were talking about listening a lot. So be here now and really listen to what the other person has to share. And then an often forgotten part of this model is the last part, which is after the conversation, follow up and follow through. It could be as simple as, thank you for making me aware. Thanks for having the conversation with me. Or here are the things that I committed to doing, and here's when I'm going to do them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Again, I think some of these things is, if we have a framework, then we can at least have a way to think about this. I always remember another element of Paul Axtell's teachings. He said, when you go into one of these conversations, how are you going to see that this turns out for the other person or take care of them? Although the phrase isn't quite accurate, because it's not that you're just going to support them and their side. It's that, how do you at least have the acknowledgement that they may not be prepared for this either? How are you going to make this work for both of you, not just for you?
Yes, it's actually something that I talk a lot about in this discussion, which is not only considering you, but considering them. The whole considering the other person thing is also something that a few people really are masterful at, and something that we all need to be reminded of is, I don't want to have this conversation, or I really totally disagree with this person and I don't want to have this discussion, or we've had this discussion 10 times and it hasn't gone anywhere. In what I'm saying, you can hear that I'm really focused on me. And I think that if we can shift ourselves even a little bit to go, what is this conversation going to be like for them? Where are they coming from? What are they hoping to get out of the conversation? How are they feeling about the conversation? How have they been feeling about the conversations we've had so far? It really can change your mindset and how you approach the conversation when you're thinking not only about yourself, but about the other person.
Right. And, as I think about the audience that we're sharing with us, if we always think about difficult conversations as around conflict or stuff. But I also think that as we want to have more diverse conversations, we want more people to voice opinions, we have to have a framework to allow that to happen so they aren't conflict conversations. They're just with people of different opinions, literally. And I think, too, as businesses want to engage with a wider range of people, they have to be ready to, again, be listening because people have different perspectives, whether it be different cultures or different genders, different whatever it may be. As leaders, and we're trying to engage with a wider range of people because we need all these people to help us become successful. Those are not difficult conversations, but they are, I'll say, challenging conversations.
For sure. For sure. And I think that goes back to, again, coming at whatever the conversation is, whether you plan to have one or you, holy cow, found yourself in the middle of one 2 minutes in, is what does this make possible? And so thinking about solutions, because we've all seen all sorts of studies about how individuals in a group can come up with much better solutions than an individual, him or herself. And so what are the other person's ideas? What are the other person's brainstorming? What do the other person think is as far as a solution? They very likely can come up with something that you haven't even thought of. And so if together you can come together and go, we see this differently, we would approach this differently, but what can we come up with as far as a shared solution? And then together work toward that, whatever it may be. Just knowing it's probably not going to be perfect, but it could be a solution nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. I'm reminded, too, of another resource I used they said whether you could physically do it or just mentally do it, it helped to look at a conversation as you're sitting side by side with the person, both looking towards the issue and not across the table from each other. Just that helped me in many cases reframe my thinking as I'm sitting beside the person. Now, sometimes you can literally do that, but in some cases it's just figuratively doing that we're not arguing over a problem between us. We're both looking at it maybe obviously from different perspectives.
Yeah. But I like your visual, Lynn, sitting side by side, at least figuratively, and together figuring out what's possible from here. What are the solutions we could come up with from here versus what so many of us do is hold very fast to my ideas and my solutions and disregard your solutions and your ideas. How can we partner? How can we collaborate and get to something better?
Right. Because in most cases, there's something that's not working, but it's not that the other person's not working necessarily. It's that whether it be a behavior or an action or something wasn't useful, and we need to talk about that. But we want to, at least in my eyes, I try to stay away from you're wrong, or as a person, you're not wrong. Maybe the action you took wasn't correct, but it's that whole idea of trying to focus on the whatever happened and not who did it kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And for there, I think there's some tactics we can rely on to do what you just said. So I think simply put, being direct and fact-based and specific with whatever your ideas or your requests are is really helpful versus kind of this vague, general, you always do this or you never do this or those kinds of things. And I think another thing is, again, back to that listening is for us to ask those open-ended questions. How or walk me through this or what are your thoughts about this versus imposing our own ideas at the outset. So trying to just be, again, really exhibit those collaborative behaviors with people so that, again, you can drive for those solutions together.
Absolutely. Well, Michelle, thank you. Any other, as we kind of wrap up these three topics, any overall thoughts that have occurred to you as we've talked here today?
Gosh, I think about when we talk about these three kind of general topics, we talked about coaching and listening and even challenging conversations. They're all kind of wrapped together. I think this reminds me that there's so many situations, so many companies or teams or families where we really are all in this together. And so much of what we talked about today is a way to build relationship with our colleagues, with our friends, with our family members, work to preserve it if it gets a little bit bumpy along the way, and really focus on those important relationships, not only because they're fulfilling for our lives, but also they can help us move the organization forward, whatever that is, whether, again, it's a team or a company or a family. And so this conversation is just reminding me that it's always very worthwhile to continue to look at your really important relationships in your life and figure out how to build upon them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your insights and knowledge today. I really appreciate it. I know my audience does. And we will include some contact information in the podcast show notes so that if people want to reach out, they can have a way to check in with you. So I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Lynn. Great to talk to you.
Thanks. Again, my deepest thanks to Michelle for sharing your insights and knowledge on becoming a more proficient and effective leader. As a quick recap, we talked about coaching, being coached, and coaching others, listening skills, so important to coaching as well as all leadership success, and finally, challenging conversations, which could be a conflict, an interview, or a performance review. Again, thanks, Michelle. So what's up next? We're going to continue a mix of solo episodes and interviews with experts, some in manufacturing, but also some in areas that can help you build your business and yourself. And at least in one episode during the month, I'll be sharing my thoughts and ideas on becoming a silver entrepreneur and how silver talent might be able to help you staff your business. And as always, I encourage you to visit my website, download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode as you start exploring these ideas, or to help you get started on your journey and to stay up to date on new episodes, please download the free worksheet, 3 Steps You Need for a More Productive Workday. In the notes will also be a link to Michelle's website. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.